49ers Web Zone No Huddle podcast, part of the Odyssey Network. I'm Al Sacco with Brian Renick, and really excited to have our guest on the show with us today. He is one half of what I think is one of the best 49ers podcasts out there. It's one of my favorite from Haberman and Middlekauff. He is Guy Haberman. Guy, thanks for being here, buddy.
You got it, fellas. Good to be with you.
So, Guy, you were last on our show. I went back and looked yesterday. It was May 5th, 2021. And why that date is significant is that was the first show we did after the 49ers drafted Trey Lance. So I went back and listened to it, and you and I went on for a half hour about what a great pick this was. And he's the next franchise quarterback in this moldable ball of clay that Kyle Shanahan has to work with. And we couldn't have said enough things. We were positive this was a great pick.
Yeah, I like the pick.
I loved it. Fast forward 2 years. What if I went back in time and told you 2 years from now, he is competing for the number 2 job with Sam Darnold and backing up the last pick in the draft? Just an unbelievable scenario. And I know you've been out at camp and watching him. I got to ask you, what have you seen from Trey this year? Do you think he's taken steps forward? And what's the finish line with him here? Where does it all end up with Trey Lance?
I do think he looks better. I think his throws are crisper. It's not that he never throws a wobbly ball, but I think he throws less of them. I think from an intermediate throw standpoint, he looks really good. None of the 49ers quarterbacks consistently hit the deep ball, partly because 49ers receivers don't consistently get open on go balls. So it looks, at least watching practice training camp, that there's a small window for those throws, small margin for error for those throws. But yeah, I think Trey looks better. I do. I didn't see any of Sam Darnold in person.
Mm-hmm.
We all watch Sam Darnold games. Those did not look good. So I don't know if Sam Darnold looks any better playing for Kyle Shanahan than he did playing for anybody else. But it's a two-part answer for me. Yes, I think Trey looks better. And yes, I think if we're just judging what have we seen in training camp, I think him and Sam have been neck and neck. I think it's pretty equal in terms of their performance to this point, based on what we can judge.
So is Trey? Well, I guess let me ask you this. Do you think Trey is still going to be on this team when the season starts? And does he have a future with the 49ers? Or is this just kind of maybe a playing out the contract type thing with him until he's done and he's just going to be the backup there?
I do think he has a future with the 49ers. I don't know if he'll be on the team, though, in a month. So those are two very different things, right? Like, I think all the talk about could he be traded, I think that's I don't think that's unreasonable. If we just think about it in the context of, is a team's third quarterback ever untradeable? Fundamentally, I think the answer to that's probably no. The third quarterback is not untradeable. The question is, because I think he still has a value to the 49ers, he has a value now to them. He also has a potential greater value later to them. I am one that still thinks Trey Lance could become a starting NFL quarterback. But if we just fundamentally say he might not be the backup, or they might view Sam Darnold is at least as good as him or as valuable to them as he is, then that's generally just using those kind of black and white parameters, a player that's tradable. The question is there a value on the trade market that is worth to them more than what the value of a third quarterback who might actually be a number 2? He might be their number 2 quarterback, first of all. But at minimum, even if he's a third quarterback, there's probably not a big gap. And we've seen that this team has a rich history of injured quarterbacks recently. So if you are all in on winning a Super Bowl and you believe the reason you couldn't play in the Super Bowl last year was because you ran out of quarterbacks, then you shouldn't give away a quarterback who you like. And I think they should like him. How much we can debate, but there's enough there.
And it's been such a wild ride since he came in. I mean, with the injuries, he just hasn't had a chance to develop. And I keep talking about he's really been one of the greenest, least experienced quarterbacks to ever come into the league. And you're bringing him into a team that is ready to win now. So it wasn't necessarily fair to him in that regard. And then you look at all the injuries he's had, from the finger to the knee to what he did to his ankle last year. He just really hasn't had a chance to develop. And then Purdy comes in and they play the way they played. And it's just kind of been circumstance. The Niners are in a position where their window is now, I think. And it's just kind of like, Trey, sorry, we think Brock can get us there. And it's, kind of development be damned for him at the moment. So maybe it's just been circumstance for him, but it's just, he's got so much talent. And I agree with you. I think he can be a starter in the league. I just don't know if it's going to be with this team.
Yeah, I don't know that he can be a starter in the league, but I think there's enough there that he might be a starter in the league. I would say two things to that. One, what I definitely miscalculated on May 5th, 2021 was how hard it would be for a quarterback who needs development to develop on this team.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the biggest part of everything, that he was gonna have a shot, and he got that shot and last year. And what it turned into was Brock Purdy's coming out party. Is Brock the franchise quarterback? That's 50-50 at this point. But
Yeah.
the part of the last several weeks that I think has to be hammered home is that any quarterback who just did what Brock Purdy did last year would be the uncontested starting quarterback in the next training camp.
100%.
He would be the starting quarterback week 1, regardless of how anybody grades his training camp throws. He would be the quarterback. If Sam Darnold had been traded to the Niners last October and he put together Brock stretch, he'd be the quarterback. If Ben Roethlisberger or Phillip Rivers had ended up on the Niners last year and put together those numbers, barring retirement, they'd be the quarterback right now. And if Trey Lance had the year that Brock Purdy just had at the end of last season, he would be the quarterback more than any of these other guys would be the quarterback right now. So, that's the part that anybody who feels that way or thinks that way, I think, has to get out of their head. We are not comparing Trey to Brock right now. Maybe one day soon we will be. Maybe 5 weeks in, it's not going well, and then there's a conversation about should Kyle Shanahan go to somebody else. But right now, the guy you don't get replaced after you do what you don't get put in a competition after you do what he just did.
Right.
I feel like Kyle Shanahan has started to develop a reputation of being pretty fickle with his quarterbacks. We saw Brock do some pretty incredible things, and no one can take that away from him. That run that he had starting in the Miami game all the way until that elbow injury was incredibly impressive. We haven't seen a 49ers offense operate at that caliber since Kyle Shanahan's been here, but you could argue maybe since Steve Young, maybe some of those Jeff Garcia offenses you could possibly throw in there, but for the most part, it was incredible. But it was still 7 games, right? 2 of which were playoffs. And then he got injured in the 8th game. Do you feel like that's enough for Kyle to have a long leash for Brock? Or do you feel like that leash for Brock is still going to be pretty short, just based on the fact that, again, there's not a lot of sample size there?
Yeah. I don't know, Brian, how exactly to characterize the leash, other than to say, I think it's, if you told me Brock is healthy enough to play 17 games, what are the odds that he never once gets pulled from a game? I'd say 50-50,
yeah,
I don't know. But the premise is, I agree with, Kyle doesn't treat quarterbacks like running backs, but here's the other thing. Sam Darnold's a free agent after the year.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So if there's any part of Kyle that's looking for a reason to see Sam Darnold, and Sam's sitting over there, hands in shoulder pads, and Brock's going through his 3rd straight game where he's not throwing touchdowns and he's throwing picks, then the environment is ripe for Kyle to let's see what Sam's got type situation. So, I think the proper place to be is this middle ground where what Brock Purdy has earned is the starting quarterback job. But we saw Colin Kaepernick's a great example, right? Mm-hmm. As a player, you can be a year, you can be 2 years. Jaws, remember when Ron Jaworski said this might be the greatest quarterback in the history of the league? And then you got to keep adjusting and evolving, and the difference between Brock and Trey, if Trey had the year Brock had last year, we'd go, God, you think of his physical upside as something that could make it even more special. And with Brock, it's a little harder to envision it because he just doesn't have the same arm fundamentally that Trey has. And you see it in practice. Trey and Sam Darnold just have a different arm than Brock has when it comes to velocity. So, there's still a lot to prove there. Last season gets him this season because we've had no games since last season, but now we're going to have more games. and he's going to have to keep proving it. And that's the nature of it. But if he keeps throwing touchdowns at the rate that he threw touchdowns, he's not going anywhere, even if he throws more interceptions.
Yeah.
One thing we saw that was eye-opening, because I think there's a lot of metrics that say that Brock and Jimmy, the offenses are actually the same. But when you watched Kyle's willingness to, it felt like throw the ball, take a few more shots.
Trusted Purdy more
in the rain where he's throwing Purdy. Deep ball. It's like there was more trust there. Yeah.
Yeah. I always point to
at least maybe there was once that trust with Jimmy and that had been broken. And eventually any quarterback can break Kyle's trust in that way. But
yeah, I always think back to the end of that Dallas playoff game where it was a couple 3rd and shorts and he had Brock throwing for him and Brock converted. But to show that kind of trust in any quarterback, let alone a rookie, I thought that spoke volumes. And Guy, I have to give you credit. So one of the things that drives me crazy is when you're going through Twitter, just reading, and you see the completion percentage for quarterbacks from camp, because there's no context to me for that whatsoever. So, they were 6 of 9 and 5 of 8, but I assume that you made it up. Your creative way of looking at it through golf scores, where you're giving the quarterbacks a birdie on a throw and a double bogey on a throw. I just want to say, like, at least it was refreshing to look at it differently. So you're judging on like the difficulty of the throw and what it was. I thought that was a really cool system to come up with. So you have been watching these guys. Is this quarterback room, we're talking about, there's so many ifs with this quarterback room. The stakes are high this year. Do you think the QB room, and maybe just Brock Purdy, do you think it's good enough to win a Super Bowl?
I think that if you win a Super Bowl with this team, you are part of the group of teams that are an exception. But the teams that are exceptions are exceptional in other areas. And the Niners are exceptional, should be exceptional on defense. They have exceptional skill guys. When it comes to the game kicks off, they have an exceptional coach, right? There's all this debate about whether Kyle can develop quarterbacks. That's totally fair. Whether you can pick quarterbacks, that's fair. But what's undeniable is when the game starts and he has to go toe-to-toe with some of the best coaches, he's good at it. Steve Wilkes, we'll see. But, I mean, Steve Wilkes is a good defensive coach.
Oh, yeah.
Feels like they're going to blitz a little bit. So, they'll have to figure that out. But, yeah, I mean, yes, I think they are good enough to – they are certainly, without debate, good enough to compete for the Super Bowl. If you lose the Super Bowl 30-21, did you almost win the Super Bowl? I don't know. It depends. Did Patrick Mahomes throw the game-winning touchdown and you don't have a guy like Patrick Mahomes? So did you almost win the Super Bowl? I don't know. But they're good enough to win the NFC, I think. I know they're good enough to get to the NFC Championship game. I think they're good enough to win the NFC. And I think they're good enough to win the Super Bowl. But when you look at the group of quarterbacks that you are going up against in the AFC, then you'd have to acknowledge that it's just they would be the exception to the rule. And I've been saying this for a few days. Now, maybe Brock Purdy turns into a 10-year starter and we look back and go, oh, it wasn't the exception. Brock just turned into like a tier 2 NFL quarterback. And that is going to be, if you're like a borderline top 10 guy, that's good enough. And maybe he becomes that. But, right now, what makes them a Super Bowl contender is their coach, their defense, and their offensive skill guys, and their run game. I mean, their run game's got to be included in that. It's an elite run game.
I think, I think this whole, I mean, the 49ers, it's just a circus around the quarterback room, and it's the main focus, and I mean, it is what it is at this point. But I feel like, that idea where if they win the Super Bowl with this quarterback room, it's largely going to be because of how good their defense is, just the sheer number of skill players have in Debo, Ayuk, CMC, George Kittle. There isn't another team that arguably that could even sniff that, if you will. And all of that is because they're not paying their quarterback right now, right? They have the highest paid left tackle. They're going to have the highest paid defensive player. They've got one of the highest paid middle linebackers. They've got one of the highest paid wide receivers. They're going to need to pay their other wide receiver. All of these things. And I feel like that it's that eye to the future, right? Where you say Brock is cheap for this season and 2 more. And if you choose him and then he signs that extension, and we know what quarterback extensions look like now, is Brock Purdy the type of quarterback that can continue to win with a team that is not going to be nearly as talented because of what they have to pay the quarterback? And I think that's the biggest question, at least it is for me. And that's where that idea of, we hope on Trey because of the physicality, the physical traits, right? Those are the traits that you see in guys like Allen and Mahomes and things like that. Doesn't mean that he'll get there, but those are the traits that you see. Whereas with Brock Purdy, I don't know that it could ever get better than it was in those 7 games last season, right? Because he's limited in terms of his physical ability. So again, do you pay a quarterback like that? It's like the idea of paying Kirk Cousins, right? Kirk Cousins isn't super gifted in any regard. He's just really, really solid. He's the bottom of the top 10, if you will. But those teams don't win. His teams don't win. And so I think that's probably the fear with Brock is with Brock, you're hoping for no regression, which is not a very exciting or sexy thing to hope for. Versus Trey, you're hoping for that light bulb to go off and all of a sudden he realizes that potential and now you've got a monster on your hands. I think that's really, at least for me, that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you're hoping for a franchise quarterback, you're hoping for the exception. If you're hoping for a franchise quarterback who's not, who does not have a big arm, then you're really hoping for the exception, right? Drew, you're hoping for the exception of the exception, which is Brees. Yeah, I mean, with Brock, it is about, is there regression coming? But it's also about, does he get better as a player? There are clearly things that he does that are elite in terms of processing. So you can overcome, he has a strong enough arm and you can overcome some of the other stuff with touch, with skill guys, all that. I mean, I think the question of whether you pay Brock Purdy it'd be a good problem to have one day. It would mean they've won with him for a year or two. And then you ask, is this guy actually good enough to really carry us? When they signed Jimmy Garoppolo to his contract, it was a little controversial at the time. And it turned out to be, there's not really a quarterback middle class, but it turned out to be in the quarterback middle class in the end. And it was enough as they continued to cycle. And it's why they're going to have hard decisions to make. What do you do with Ayuk? What do you do with Debo? Do you have to end up choosing between the two of them? It's why you got to draft well, all that kind of stuff. So it's part of why I wouldn't give away Trey Lance right now, because there might be a decision to make in 8 to 12 months. If Brock's not the franchise quarterback, then if he's willing to play for the right price, Kirk Cousins probably is the quarterback on this team in a year.
Yeah.
Unless
we've been saying that.
But there's scenarios where that's not the case. We've been saying that for several years. The Niners have been trying to look for quarterbacks at the same time where Kirk Cousins has been available and they haven't gotten Kirk Cousins. So, maybe that turns into Sam Darnold. I don't know, but it's been clear as this thing has gone under Kyle Shanahan that the obvious next step is not always the thing that plays itself out. And Brock's a great example of that. But yeah, I mean, that's why you have some consternation about Purdy, because you go, well, one day if he's really good, if he's pretty good, he becomes really expensive, which would be, I guess a good problem to have. But
yeah,
it's like
partly because you feel like Kyle can at least, one thing you say about him, right, is he can take tier 3-ish quarterbacks and you can play tier 2 football, in part because he as a coach emphasizes physicality, run game, and defense. He is not going to be the guy that tries to be an offense for a passing first team and then doesn't, overvalues his quarterback and doesn't give his team the ability to make up for the fact that they're actually not that. So I think that's also a positive trait of his in that regard. But yeah, I've said this many times. I'm sure I've talked about it with a lot of people. Like, it's pretty crazy to see a team this consistently a championship contender with the quarterback situation. Kyle Shanahan.
Yeah.
I
don't know that we've seen anything like it before.
It's crazy. And we keep talking about on the show, the window is kind of closing with this core. That doesn't mean the window can't continue to be open if they draft well and one of these quarterbacks hit or whatever. But George Kittle even talked about it recently, where he said, we understand that the window, whatever that is, could be closing. He said, I think that's something that our team is very aware of. We have a lot of highly priced players on this team who have earned the money, and you can only pay so many guys. And if you look at the roster, Trent Williams might have 2 years left. George Kittle, maybe 2. They may have to choose between Debo and Ayuk. Eric Armstead probably won't be here for another couple of years. Christian McCaffrey, is he really going to be at this level 3 years from now? So really that window is the next year or two. And when you consider that, to me, there's a lot of pressure to do it now. And it's hard to make the NFC Championship once, let alone what we're asking 4 out of 5 years and then go beyond to the Super Bowl. So, Guy, if they don't make the Super Bowl and I guess win the Super Bowl this year, is it a disappointment? Is this year, have we gotten to that point where it's a failure right now with this team if they don't win the Super Bowl?
It's definitely a disappointment and a failure if they don't get there. I mean, they have been so, this has been the franchise of winning championships has become the franchise of being close under Harbaugh and now under Shanahan, and I don't say that derisively, like it's just the reality of what's happened.
Yeah.
And you'd like to think if you're around the ball enough, eventually it bounces your way. But it would be a real shame to waste this NFC where we know who the top 2 teams are. I think we know who the other good team is. It's Dallas.
Sure.
Yes.
I don't think I think Dallas should have never hired Mike McCarthy, and I felt that from the beginning. And I don't think you can win a championship with Mike McCarthy. But let's not forget, right? Tony Pollard was playing pretty good football last year when he got hurt. And that was a 1-score game in the end. So we got to respect
change the whole game.
Yep. But it would be it would feel pretty criminal to not get to the Super Bowl with this group of players. Given the NFC. Now you still got to beat Philly. There's a long way between here and there, but that's what the standard is. That's what the goal is. That's why you have one of the best rosters in the NFL. How can the standard be anything other than go to the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl? And it'd be particularly painful to go and lose again, considering not just what happened the last time they were there, what happened last year, but to me, considering what happened to Kyle as the offensive coordinator of the Falcons. I think it'd be particularly painful for him. Sean McVay didn't retire. Are the Rams a championship contender this year? No, but McVay's a really good coach in your division. What if the Cardinals what if they have the worst record in the league and they end up with Caleb Williams and they have the number 1 pick?
I don't even think that's a what if. They've got, even if they don't get the number 1 pick, the amount of capital that they gained last year with those trades, it was brilliant. And I think Caleb Williams absolutely is an Arizona Cardinal. I don't even think, that's obviously we've got a long way to go. They're one of them for sure.
I just mean the worst team in the league. For that to happen, somebody with a quarterback has to have the number 1 pick, right? You're just
that's true. That's true.
But it doesn't. Indy could be. I don't know. Yeah, who knows?
Texans maybe.
And by the way, being the number 2, having the number 2 pick is also good. Drake May is like the top 2 picks next year are quarterbacks. So you might have a really good. To Brian's point, there's a good chance you got a good quarterback coming in this league, or they might pick 5th or 7th or 13th and get a good quarterback.
Or the Rams and the Cardinals pick 1 and 2. And that is a definite possibility.
There you go.
Yeah. Is there a scenario where the Niners should lose to the Rams or the Cardinals? They play the Rams at the last. Let's say the Niners have locked up their first round bye week 18. Dream scenario for them. But let's say not just let's say they've locked up the ones. That's the thing is you can't mess around. You need the one. Right. But let's just say, and the Rams are tied for the 2nd worst record in the league. You gotta lose that game. You gotta lose that game.
You don't want those 2 quarterbacks coming in and next year maybe.
But anyway, like this is it's set up for you in theory right now. So,
Guy, who are some people that have stood out to you in camp, non-QBs?
Well, the safeties I think have made a lot of plays. No surprise. Hufanga, Gibson, Odom, Jair Brown had his first interception on Tuesday in practice on a really nice play that was kind of Hufanga-esque. Brown, like safety coming over to the sideline, deep throw, makes it more of a good play than a bad throw. Hufanga's made 2 of those plays this camp. I think the preseason, Brown is on my short list, and he's the 3rd round pick, so it's not shocking, but he's on my short list of guys that I'm excited to see because training camp really doesn't lend itself to a physical safety, right? And so he's a guy I'd say I'm excited to see. I think Isaiah Oliver, the new nickelback, has looked you watch him, you go, that's a professional football player they just put on.
He's a good player.
Position. Good player. Womack's made a few plays. Let's see. I'm looking through my board here.
Let me ask you this question specifically, Guy. Have you watched the linebackers at all? And I imagine that they'll carry 5. They usually do. Obviously, Greenlaw and Warner are their top 2. I would assume Burks is number 3 just because they signed him to that deal. and he's kind of a special teams captain. So really you're looking for who replaces Aziz and then who is that fifth linebacker out of Marcelino McCrary-Ball, D. Winters, Jalen Graham, Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles, and I might be missing one. I'm not sure. Who do you think are those last two behind Warner, Greenlaw, and Burks?
Flanagan-Fowles and McCrary-Ball.
Okay.
I mean,
you think the one thing I thought it was interesting that they drafted two linebackers this past season. It felt to me like that was them acknowledging one of these guys is going to stick. And D. Winters, to me, he looks just, I mean, he physically is like a Dre Greenlaw clone.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if they go younger and then Fowles is kind of out. That was my thought.
It's a great question. I mean,
he's on the older end.
He's got like his time to do that's going to be now in these games.
Yeah.
McCrary-Ball's made several plays. You see kind of some of the speed show up, and that's really valuable. So I think it has appeared to me like it's between those two, McCrary-Ball and Flanagan-Fowles. But you're right. I mean, they did draft the 6th round linebacker. They've had good success in that, at that position. And so you've got to think that there's some potential there. Jalen Graham, by the way, the 7th rounder from Purdue, when you just look, he's like, not that being tall is a prerequisite of this position, but man, he is big. He stands out physically from a height standpoint. I'm excited to see D. Winters. He'd be on the list as well of guys you want to watch in the preseason. But it has felt to me to this point in training camp that it's between MMB and DFF.
What about the defensive end position? Because we assume Nick Bosa is going to be there eventually, but even before the holdout, I kind of looked at the roster and I said, okay, you don't have Ebukam anymore. You don't have a Menahue. Jordan Willis was a good rotational guy, and now you're relying on Drake Jackson to step up in year 2. Cleveland Farrell, Austin Bryant, maybe Taco Charlton, Robert Beal, who they drafted late. A lot of we don't knows, and we know Chris Kosarek is great. We know that, but the guys who's coaching this year, who knows? So has anybody jumped out to you from that group? Are you worried about that group?
I was not worried about that group. And, from a depth standpoint, they've gotten a little nicked up. And so they add Taco, and now you can see very quickly that they probably do need a little more depth at that spot. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the front line, Bosa, Armstead, Hargrave, and to me, then it becomes Furl and Jackson, whichever one. Maybe Furl wins the thing. But I think Drake's going to have a better year. And I think when you have Hargrave, Armstead, Bosa, Cleveland Furl's more than good enough to be the 4th guy there. So I think if you and then, by the way, you bump Kinlaw to kind of, you don't have to, you're not relying on him that much. Kerry Hyder's reliable. Givens. There are guys who have played for them. And you know what you're going to get. Austin Bryant's made a few plays in camp. But I think in terms of I think it's more a depth issue than a who is your 4th guy issue. I think the combination of Furl and Jackson is more than good enough when combined with the other 3. But I do think there is probably a depth question they need to address here.
Yeah, and I think I'm literally the only person in the world who's actually worried about Nick Bosa not being there. Not that he's not going to sign. I just am like, is he going to get in really late? Does he tweak a hamstring? Just things like that I guess, I don't know, the East Coast guy in me finds things to worry about. But everybody else is kind of like, he's going to be there. It's not a big deal. But to me, I'm kind of like, what is the holdup here? You kind of have Aaron Donald's contract. Just give him. Aaron Donald makes like $32.5 million a year and $95 million guaranteed. Give Bosa 33 and 100, you're done. But maybe there's more going on.
Give him 33 and what? 100 guaranteed?
33 and 100 guaranteed.
Joey got 102.
Did he get 102? I thought Aaron Donald had 95. I thought that was the most. Okay, so I'm wrong. So you got to go, but whatever the highest paid guarantee is, you got to go above it. So
102.5.
Is that what Joey Bosa got?
No, he got.
Oh, I didn't know that. See, I'm looking at the Aaron Donald contract. So that whatever it is.
Are you looking at the practical guarantee or the?
Whatever. I looked on Spot Rack. It said Aaron Donald had $95 million in guarantees.
His extension was 3 years, 95, and all of it was fully guaranteed. That was Donald's extension.
I don't think Joey's full guarantee was 102. I think it was a little lower.
Oh, okay.
But
I thought Donald was the
guarantee
most.
102. Yeah.
And I think that's what you have to do. I think you have to probably go 33 million a year and 100 mil guaranteed. That's probably what it's going to be.
But I don't think like what we've got here are the.
Oh yeah, I say, guys, right? It's 78 fully guaranteed, 102 in overall guarantees.
Oh, okay. So what were you saying, Guy?
Well, just the Bosas are hard line and the Niners are hard line, and I don't think hard line negotiations get resolved 5 weeks before the deadline. But that doesn't mean don't be worried.
Yeah. Am I crazy? Am I crazy?
John Lynch said that was in the John Lynch press conference the other day. He said he thinks a player needs 3 weeks to get ready for an NFL season.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Now, do you want him to play in preseason games? Not really. But
but
there is even if you say he's definitely here, you gotta absolutely. It's natural. He's been hurt before. You worry.
Yeah.
Is he going to be? That's.
Yeah, I feel like everybody tells me I'm crazy, but I feel like it's a legit concern. Just because we're talking about the Super Bowl, we need home field. You don't want to start slow. You don't want to start out 3-3 or 3-4, and then you're going to Philly or you're going to Dallas, right? Ideally, you want to get a bye. You want to get home field. So I just feel like it's something. Again, I'm a New York guy. I always find stuff to worry about, but it's kind of where
There's something to be said for that, though. Doesn't mean it's wrong.
Yeah. So when do you think it gets done?
I guessed yesterday. Like going into the third preseason game that week, the Chargers.
That's fair.
Chargers.
Yeah,
and then it gives you another week, but that's a little later than John Lynch would like.
Yeah, I was say when we talked about it a couple episodes ago, Al, we determined that 3 weeks from game 1 is August 20th. That is 3 weeks exactly to game 1, with Lynch saying he needed 3 weeks to get ready. So I wonder if the 49ers have kind of circled that as we'd like to get this done by then. But like you said, Guy, the Bosas are hardliners. Remember, Joey Bosa held out until almost the end of August before he signed his rookie contract when he was drafted by the Chargers. So they're not at all strangers to lengthy holdouts. And I don't think it has anything to do with animosity, and just they know what their value is. And, as Nick Bosa, he knows what his value is, and he knows that the 49ers need him more than he needs the 49ers. And that's where, I think it comes down to someone's got to blink first. And I imagine it's going to have to be Parag, not Nick and his agent.
Well, what do you think the Niners' first offer was? I don't think there's any chance the Niners' first offer was anything but the biggest defensive contract in the history of the NFL. They didn't offer less than Aaron.
You don't think you think so?
I think so. Maybe
and that wasn't enough.
You think they offered him less than Aaron Donald or Joey Bosa?
We surmised that perhaps it was a tad better than what TJ Watt got. That was
in the middle of Donald and Watt. If they're trying,
I don't know. Maybe you're right. Maybe that is kind of the Niners' MO. Is they're gonna do first what the computer spits out they should do. But I think there's a chance they offered him the biggest contract, or at least by now they've offered him the biggest contract for a defensive player ever, and that still has not gotten the deal done.
Are him and Chris Jones playing games? Maybe they don't want to sign for the other one. I don't know. To me, it was just nuts that you've known this is going to happen for a while. I'm kind of like, why isn't it done? But again, I don't know. Maybe it's just me because I say that and everybody jumps down my throat. Typically,
it's not our money.
Yeah, I don't know. But hey, Guy, we really appreciate the time today. Tell everybody where they can find you.
Check out the Haberman and Middlekauff YouTube channel and the podcast. You can check out both those things.
We appreciate the time today.
Promo code HAM.
Everybody.
That's right.
There you go. Drink Tito's. We appreciate the time. We appreciate everybody for listening. For Brian, I'm Al. Thanks, everybody.
Later.